So you guys may recall that a few weeks ago, I talked about this idea that I take key demarcations in life to kind of take some time for reflection. Simple one is a new year. New year starts, look back at the year it's gone by, and I kind of say, what was the good things that happened? What should I be grateful for? Take a moment to actually be grateful for those things. What are the things that didn't go quite the way I wanted to? How could I adjust going forward? And I do this in a lot of things. The New Year's the obvious one, but I do it in jobs. I do it with our anniversaries. I kind of do it in kind of every big thing in my life. And so I was thinking about the fact that, I've now been here for a little over a year. We talked about that. And I was reflecting on the past year. And it occurred to me that I've really neglected one really important thing this past year. I have never shown you guys pictures of my cats. In that entire year, I have never once shown you. So I thought today was the day to rectify that. So we've had as many as 4 cats at one time. Right now we have 3. The one coming in from the side, the black and white one, is our girl Gracie. The one in the back, the all black one is with the purple collar rubbing the box. That's Avari. It's actually a name from a Tolkien book. And the one in the middle is Franklin, named Franklin, because at 3 weeks old he was found in a ditch in Franklin. So that's his name. Now Franklin's my bud. Franklin and I kind of hang out kind of more than all the other cats. So this is a picture of just Franklin. And he's kind of the only one that sleeps with me at night, that he kind of crawls in bed with us. I'll wake up, at 4 in the morning and he's asleep across my chest, or he'll burrow under the blanket and kind of sleep next to me. And Franklin's special for a lot of reasons. He had some health issues early on that we thought we were going to lose him. He's also the first cat I ever got as a kitten. So this is Franklin as a kitten. And he's an adorable kitten, and I used to call him my bug, because he used to look like a little furry caterpillar running around. And I was in my 40s before I ever had a kitten, because I grew up in a dog household. I wasn't against cats, we just didn't have cats. I had dogs. But when you marry a cat person, you become a cat person, right? So this is Franklin, and Franklin is adorable as a kitten. I'll show you another picture of Franklin. Now this is Franklin sitting on a shopping bag. Now it seems like an innocent enough picture, but what you don't see is about 3 seconds before this picture, his sister was laying on that shopping bag. And Franklin could not have that. And Franklin is the biggest cat in the house. He's 18 pounds, so he's a big cat. And so he just pounces on his sisters when they do things he doesn't like. And what we have discovered is apparently we're not very good cat parents, because Franklin is prone to discontent. That he has a tendency to realize when somebody else has something, even though he didn't want it before they have it, if they have it, it must be worth having. So I will go take it from them. And so he does it with shopping bags, he does it with toys. How cats are with the sun, cats like to lay in the sun. There can be a sunny spot that he has been laying next to in the shade for an hour. He doesn't care. Until one of his sisters goes and lays in the sun, and then he pounces them to drive them out of the sun, and he now lays there. Now, I would love to say that that kind of behavior is unique to Franklin, or even unique to cats. But I think we all have tendencies to be prone to discontent. And I think that if you reflect back to when your children were young, it's something we seem to be born with. When your kids were 2 years old, did anyone have to teach them to get angry and selfish and grab something from someone, or they just seem to kind of know to do that? It's something that we just seem to get that way sometimes. Now, fortunately, as we get older, we get more self-control, and we tend to do that less. But I'm not sure it ever goes away. I think there's this constant tendency, particularly in times of change or discomfort, that we tend to find ourselves feeling discontent. So today, as we wrap up our series, Community Matters, what I want to talk about is being united in purpose. United, it's in our name, right? We come together. It's what we do. And as we go through this series, the thing we've talked about over and over again is that the question stands before us. What does it mean to be a community church in the 21st century? And as we've said, it fundamentally never changed. It means serving your community. But the details of what that looks like have changed. And we've gone through a bunch of things throughout the series. We talked about the fact that we're going to move from one worship service to two, so we can provide two different worship styles. Maintain a traditional style, in fact, an even more traditional style than we have now, as well as introducing a much more modern style. We talked about our individual roles in the community and the importance of recognizing that when we go out into the community, we might as well be wearing a jersey that identifies that we are part of this church and we are Jesus followers. And it means we represent this church, we represent Jesus, we represent God as we go out. We want to make sure that we treat people in a way consistent with the teachings of Jesus. And then last week, we talked about the fact that families today face incredibly unique challenges. Again, parenting was never easy. But today, there are challenges that did not exist when most of us were growing up. And families need support, and kids need support. And so we need to reorient ourselves around providing those kinds of programs to support kids, programs to support parents, programs to give families the help that we need. But now, as we go through this whole series, I've talked so much about the community outside of our church and around our church and all the people throughout our town and our region that we need to support and we need to care for. Well, today, as we finish up, there's another community I'd like to talk about. The community inside the church. What does all this mean for all of us? What does this mean for you? What does it mean for me? What does it mean for us collectively? Because as I've been talking a lot about change. I'm talking a lot about what we're going to do. I'm talking a lot about who we need to go serve. And as I talk about all those people out there and all the things we need to do for those people out there, I think some legitimate questions come to mind. I'm sitting in this church already. What about me? What's this mean for me? How's this going to affect me? And those questions are normal, and those questions are healthy. I was going to say there's nothing wrong with asking those questions, but that's even the wrong statement. It is perfectly healthy and appropriate to ask those questions. And the thing that I want to be clear on, and this is something we talked about way back in the call process, that I had a vision for how we move this church kind of into the 21st century and how we address the things we need to. And my promise all along, and that promise remains true, is that it is a group effort as we go forward. It's not me running out there saying, I'm going to do what I want. I hope you keep up. We're going to do this together, but we have to do it together, and we have to do it. That's the thing. And so what I want everyone to understand, and what I want to state very clearly, that each and every one of you are important parts of where we're going. In fact, we can't do what we need to do if we're not all on board with it. That the work we have to do is hard. But the thing that I find, and I think most of us find, there's something about doing hard work that makes a difference. Hard work that makes a difference pulls us together. It doesn't tear us apart. Hard work that makes a difference helps us to see our purpose. And as Jesus followers, our purpose is to care for the people around us, to do what God has called us to do. It's stepping into that purpose that strengthens us as the community within the church. And we want to boldly do that, and we want to go forward together doing that. There's just something about doing the work that we were created to do. And I believe that as Jesus followers, the Holy Spirit of God dwells inside each and every one of us. And God propels us forward to do more than we can imagine. And He allows us to be part of the miracle transformations that He brings over and over again. And we are most fulfilled in our role as Jesus followers when we allow that power to be alive and act within us. And this idea, this attitude, this importance of serving the people around you was so prevalent in the early church. It was actually a defining factor in the early church. And the early church saw incredible growth and incredible success, and they impacted so many lives. This kind of crazy group of 12 unlikely people rapidly grew in the hundreds and grew in the thousands because they embraced the call on their lives, embraced the power of Holy Spirit inside of them to do amazing things. And this drew the church together. It created unity in the church. As you recall, the book of Acts, or what we call the book of Acts, is a book in our Bibles that's technically called the Acts of the Apostles. And basically, it's an author named Luke who actually documents the life of the early church, that kind of first, probably about 30 years of the church, the first few decades of the church. And he describes what happens in the church. And very early on, in kind of that first year of the church's existence, he describes things this way. He says, all the believers were united in heart and mind, and they felt that what they owned was not their own. So they shared everything they had. Now, that verse, as it talks about that, what's telling us is that they saw each other as brothers and sisters, that they had differences, but they supported each other, and they worked together. And they were united by two common things: their faith in Jesus and their recognition and execution of their purpose of carrying that message forward by caring for people and working in people's lives and stepping into people's lives. But now, as we look at the words in there that say they felt that what they owned was not their own and they shared everything, that doesn't mean that people didn't own property. It's not trying to describe socialism or communism. What it's saying is that the people looked around and they didn't sell all their stuff, but if they had the resources available and they saw that someone needed help, if they could help, they would help. That they adopted this mindset of saying, well, I'm not going to keep all I have for me. I'm going to value people over property. I'm not going to sell everything I own, but if the opportunity presents itself where someone needs help, if I can help, I'm going to help. And that willingness to help the people around them, even the non-Christians around them, was this unusual characteristic in the Christians. It was a distinguishing characteristic, that this idea of valuing people above anything else was unique to them. That was, in the first century Roman Empire, nobody lived that way. People were disposable in the first century. And suddenly the Christians come along and go, that's not it. That's not how it works. We don't believe that. We believe that we care for people. And it was in that caring attitude that those early Christians found an incredible sense of purpose. And as they pursued their common purpose, they got more and more united. They drew closer together by doing the work. And what's so amazing is that during that time, they faced incredible challenges. I mean, they were opposed by the Roman government, the strongest government in the world at that time. Do you know what normally happens to organizations that were opposed by the Roman government? They don't last long. They just get crushed. But somehow, they kept going. Somehow, they carried forward. And even though they had all that opposition, and life was difficult for them at times, they had incredible joy. Because there's joy in purpose. There's joy in following our purpose. There's joy in doing the thing that I truly believe that each of us are made to do, to step out and do these sort of things. And that common purpose united them. It drew them together. And what we see there is that if we look at what happened in the early church, that incredible growth that they experienced, that incredible transformation they experienced, was fueled by their embracing their faith, caring for people around them, and it empowered them to do incredible things. And I believe God is unchanging. If God is unchanging, if embracing that faith and purpose empowered them, embracing that faith and purpose empowers us. We can see incredible transformation in our church, in our town, in our region, if we embrace that. But the thing we have to remember is that even in the early church, even though they were so united in purpose, it doesn't mean they never encountered difficulties. In fact, Luke documents for us that just a few years after the time where this verse is written, they're already starting to have trouble. As little as 1 year after this, not more than about 4 years after this, they're already starting to have difficulties. And Luke describes those difficulties this way. He says, as the believers rapidly multiplied, there were rumblings of discontent. The Greek-speaking believers complained about the Hebrew-speaking believers, saying that their widows were being discriminated against in the daily distribution of food. Now, what's interesting about this, that phrasing of the Greek-speaking believers, the Hebrew-speaking believers, is kind of a confusing phraseology. What these two groups of people are, there are two groups of people who had grown up Jewish and then had become Jesus followers. They had this incredible shared history due to their Jewish faith, but there was something unique about each group. The Hebrew-speaking believers were the Jews that had grown up in the area of Jerusalem and eventually became Jesus followers. The Greek-speaking believers at this point are still Jews. They just happened to grow up outside the city of Jerusalem, but became Jesus followers. Now think of all the things those people had in common. They would have been more than 90% the same. But there was a little difference. There was a little change that this new group kind of moved in among them. And that created discontent. And the thing that's kind of interesting to note, as we look at that verse really carefully, does anywhere say that the widows were actually being mistreated, or that there were simply accusations, complaints, and they're saying they're being mistreated? Nowhere is it documented that the Greek widows were actually being mistreated. Maybe they were, maybe they weren't. Ultimately, it doesn't matter. As soon as enough people believe that's the case, it might as well be true. And that started to tear them apart. And here's the thing, is that as far as we can tell, these complaints and this grumbling went on for an extended period of time, with no one ever telling the leadership that there was a problem. Because as soon as the leadership found out that there were these accusations going on, you know what the leadership did? They didn't throw everybody out. What they said is that, well, we don't know if there's a problem or not, but there might be. So they appointed a group of people to take responsibility for that area, to say that we're going to make sure it's fair, we're going to make sure it's done right. But the leadership couldn't do that until they knew about it. And so if we think about it, think of all the grumbling that had happened over all that time while no one's telling anyone in charge what's happening. And think of all the ill will that developed. Because we know that all we need is a couple of people start to say that they're unhappy about something. And that starts making more and more people unhappy. And so what may have happened here is that as the Greek believers started complaining, more and more of them started to complain. And they started to come up with all kinds of other things that were wrong with those Hebrew believers. You know what else they do? And then once the Hebrew believers heard about what the Greek believers were saying, what do you think they did? Well, you know what, those Greek believers, you know what's going on over there? Right? Where if someone would have just started at the beginning and said, hey, you know what? I saw something that doesn't look right to me. And take it to someone who can help. And say, I don't know what's happening, but this didn't look right to me. Based on what we know about that leadership, the leadership would have appointed that committee right away and addressed it. But they couldn't do it, couldn't do anything about it until they knew about it. And I think we all know situations like that. We all know of times where, I'll speak for myself, I know of times in my life where I've heard something where, I didn't get all my facts yet, and I got all spun up, and I got all angry. And then I'm like, oops, sorry, maybe I should have listened more. Maybe I should have looked more. Maybe I should have investigated further. Maybe I should have talked to someone who's making these decisions as opposed to assuming that someone's making decisions without asking me. I think it's something that's so important for us to remember, that that threat faces all of us at some point in our lives. And so the thing I want to encourage us all with is that, as I started out with my picture of my cat Franklin, who gets all spun up wanting things he didn't want, but someone else wants them now, so I once want them too. That is inside of all of us. And I think that inside of all of us, there is this, I don't know what I want to call it. There's something that we're born with that tends to make us believe we're being treated unfairly. I think that comes up in all of us sometimes. And that we need to make a point to not let that overtake us. And we need to make a point to recognize that we have more in common with everyone around us, than differs from us. And we need to recognize that and remember that and be willing to talk to one another. Because, my friends, there is a significant reality in front of us, is that as a 21st century community church, a church that is 250 years old next year, to be around another 250 years, we got to change, folks. We got to adapt. We got to move into the call that's in front of us. Doesn't mean we abandon our traditions, but we need to step into the real needs in front of us. And there's a lot of work for us to do. Work that can only be done if we're working together. And this work will take us years to do. And so I'll back up. If you work at anything that long, disagreements are going to happen. If you work together with anyone for years on anything, I don't love anybody like I love Bonnie. And we always get along. We never disagree. We always make the same decisions and choices. Come on, that should be at least a groan, right? I mean, come on, right? Right? Of course we disagree, right? I mean, we are far more alike than different. We're kind of frighteningly alike at sometimes. But we disagree. And if we just held them in, what happens? You hold it in till you can't hold it in no more. And then it blows up. Where if when something first goes wrong, or something is slightly uncomfortable, you bring it up sooner, and you deal with it. And there's also something else that I've had to adopt in my life. If Bonnie does something that upsets me, which almost never happens, by the way. If Bonnie does something that upsets me, sometimes I will find myself being offended. And I've had to say something to myself when that happens. I know who she is. And I know she wouldn't do that. So there's a misunderstanding here somewhere. Because the woman I know, the woman I love, doesn't do that. And we need to apply that filter to all of our interactions. I know who that person is. They may have done something that does upset me, but it's unlikely that their goal was to upset me. Let's give each other that grace. Let's kind of stay together that way. Let's work together that way, because there's kind of this tendency, I think, sometimes that when someone hurts us, that we assume that was what they set out to do. And that's very rarely the case. Because as we go forward, as we make these changes, man, it's going to create discomfort. We're going to work together. We're going to talk about it. I promise not to drop surprises on you. I respect our governance. I respect our council. I follow that process. But we are going to have to make changes, and it's going to make us uncomfortable. And guess what? We're going to get some things wrong. We're going to try things that are not going to work. But we have to. That's how we achieve success. There's a TV show that used to be on the Discovery Network. It was on for almost 15 years. It's called The Mythbusters. Anybody watch The Mythbusters? I love The Mythbusters. I love it. The new one was kind of wacky, but the old one was really good. And there's a saying that they had. That I actually have. Don't worry, I'm not stripping naked. Don't get all excited. There's this saying that they had. I wanted to take my shirt all the way off, but it would mess up my microphone, so I can't. It says, failure is always an option. And their point in saying that Well, well, the point is that you choose it. You be willing to choose it. Their point in saying that was that if you watch the show, they were constantly trying to solve really difficult problems. In their cases, they were largely engineering type problems, but they were always trying to solve difficult problems. And they kind of took this approach. If we only try things that are going to work, we're never going to figure the really hard stuff out. So we need to be willing to try things that just might not work, because you know what? They just might. And it's that willingness to fail that makes all the difference. And the other thing, that willingness to allow the person next to you to fail without condemnation is essential. That we need to have the grace to fail in our own lives, and we need to give grace to everyone around us to fail. Fail as they do things for us as a church. Sometimes we fall down and fail in life. And we don't hold that against one another. And we stand together in that. And that pulls us together when we do that. So as we go forward, as we kind of develop this idea around being a 21st century community church, the most important thing that we can do is talk to one another. Communicate. When someone upsets you, talk to them about it. Don't hold it in. Be polite, but talk to them about it. If I upset you, talk to me about it. I worked on Wall Street, guys, for 11 years. I am used to being criticized. All right, I do fine with that kind of stuff. That I'm pretty hard to offend. So if something's going on you don't like, talk to somebody. Talk to me. If you don't feel comfortable talking to me, we have our PPRMT, and I know what it stands for even. The Pastor Parish Relationship Ministry Team. All right, that's Nancy, Carol, and Joyce, who's not here. If you're not comfortable talking to me, talk to one of them. I talk to these guys all the time. And they'll tell me, and if you want to stay anonymous, that's fine. But don't hold it in. Because, we're moving forward. We have to move forward. And it's going to create discomfort. And we're going to get things wrong. And one of the things that's really important to understand, you see a ton of things from your position that I can't see in my position. And so if you see things, say something. And we'll do the best we can to deal with it. And be willing to step up and do that. Because I think that although we have a lot of challenges in front of us, I believe we will go through times of discomfort. I believe that ultimately our success will unite us far more than the discomfort erodes us. The Apostle Paul gives this advice. He says, make allowance for each other's faults and forgive anyone who offends you. Remember, the Lord forgave you, so you must forgive others. Above all, clothe yourselves with love, which binds us all together in perfect harmony. My friends, I am convinced that we are moving into an amazing time in our church. If you read through the history of our church, going all the way back to 1772, there were periods where things went down, but they always had one thing in common. They were followed by periods where things went up. I think that's where we are now. That's what's in front of us. I believe that God has positioned us in this exact moment in time, on this exact piece of land, to serve the community where He has placed us, to draw us together in a common mission, and that by being united as a church, we can make all the difference in the world. And you, each and every one of you, are central to that success. So let's stay united. And let's make allowances for each other's faults. Forgive someone who offends you. And if there's an old offense that's still hanging out there, forgive that too. And let's move forward. And let's be bound together in love and work together in harmony. I believe that is the moment that God has called us to. I believe that is the moment that we will step up to. And I believe it's in that moment that we will see amazing things happen around us.